The event today is on cybersecurity in healthcare. I'm Saira Ghafur. I'm the lead for digital health at the Institute of Global Health Innovation and a security science fellow at ISST as well. And over the past couple of years at Imperial College, we claim to have set up the first global cyber academic unit in healthcare. So we've been doing lots of work, from policy work on the state of cybersecurity in the NHS. We did an impact analysis of what happened after the WannaCry cyber attack in 2017. And more recently, Nikki will speak about this in a bit, we've developed a cybersecurity framework that can be used in global healthcare organisations. And we ask, why is healthcare different in terms of cybersecurity to other critical sectors? And the thing that we always talk about through our research at Imperial College is it all boils down to patient safety. So, and we've seen this over and over again, that any attack or cyber attack on healthcare can impact patient safety. So it's not just a case of this is an IT issue and IT people have to deal with it. This is everybody's issue. And it's one of the things that in terms of relaying that message and that education piece, not really got through to this is everyone's business in terms of patient safety. So I'm going to call upon our brilliant panel, and I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to give a couple of minutes of what they do and their relation to cybersecurity work, and then we'll lead into some questions. So we have Phil Huggins, who is a National Chief Information Security Officer for Health and Social Care. We've got Sean van Nijkerk, who's the founder and Chief Information Security Officer at Steeple Cyber. We've got Nikki O'Brien, who's the Global Lead for Medical Innovation and Digital Health at Save the Children. And we've got Richard Gunstone, who is the Head of Security Operations at the UK Health Security Agency. So if I go over to Sean to start with an introduction, and we'll go around the table.
Background, I've been in tech 30 years. I've been in IT for majority of that, and then subsequently what I've done as well is I've worked in the private sector, built a cyber practice, built a managed services company before. I've also, led a number of teams, I want to say, outside of the NHS. And fundamentally, experience-wise, I've worked on thousands of high-tech projects around, whether it was data center builds, whether it was PACS implementations, PAS implementations. So I've worked with some of the best, digital transformation leads in the sector. So from my perspective, I cover a broad area, and also get to work with the national bodies around some of the innovations and products and services, landing on the ground.
Excellent, thank you. Phil?
Hi, so my name is Phil Huggins. I am the Director for Cyber Policy at Department for Health and Social Care, and I'm also the National Chief Information Security Officer for Health and Care in England, which is a joint team I run on behalf of the department and on behalf of NHS England. So I set strategy, policy direction, provide oversight, regulation of the health and care system in England, and also drive investment in transformation programs to improve cybersecurity across the sector. So I am very much on point for the cyber resilience of the healthcare system.
Thank you. Nikki.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki O'Brien, and I wear two hats. As Saira mentioned, I'm the Medical Innovation and Digital Health Lead at Save the Children International, and I'm also a Research Fellow Honorary at the Institute of Global Health Innovation, which is another Imperial College London institute. And in that role, I've been working for the last few years to develop a cybersecurity framework specifically for healthcare, and specifically targeting the range of stakeholders across low and middle income countries who may have limited experience and knowledge on the more technical aspects of cybersecurity. So working with Saira and her team, we developed what's called the Essential of Cybersecurity for Healthcare Organizations, the ECHO framework, which is a framework made up of 6 key components, 51 elements underneath those components, that we believe is a sort of minimum standard if you're a well-resourced and equipped institution, or a aspirational checklist if you're a low and middle income organization, perhaps with less resources and less expertise. And we're now in the process of digitalizing that and providing key people access to trial that resource, which provides key information and checklists and other useful tools for organizations to build their cyber resilience. And then working at Save the Children, I am the person responsible for identifying and mitigating our risks across medical services in something like 50 countries. And in that role, obviously, cyber plays an increasingly important part as digital technologies for healthcare are being used more and more. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm excuse me, I'm Richard Gunston. I'm the head of cybersecurity operations in the UK Health Security Agency. So UKHSA is around about 2 years old. It's formed from the merger of a number of different organisations, and we do things like prevent and respond to health threats. Obviously in our history was the COVID-19 pandemic and managing that. Our mission is to prepare for, prevent and respond to health threats, save lives and protect livelihoods. That obviously then translates into the data that we manage and the data that we hold, and it's obviously critically important. It's taken very seriously by UKHSA, the security of the data that it holds. So my team, the cybersecurity operations team, is responsible for principally detection and response to cybersecurity incidents. So that's looking ahead a little bit, looking at the threat landscape, what's coming down the tracks. Obviously, then if something happens, we deal with it. And then I'm also part of the senior leadership team for cyber, working to Charlie Sammett, who unfortunately can't be here today. I should send his apologies. And collectively as a team, we're pushing forward the mission for cybersecurity in UKHSA and implementing our strategy. So it's quite exciting times. Yeah.
Excellent. So I've got a couple of questions planned, but it'd be great to hear from the audience as well. So we'll kind of go through our overview, and then I'll call upon the audience as well. Jack, are we able to get any online questions as well, or?
Yes, when we receive them, we'll pass them on.
Lovely, thank you. So just going to start, and actually I'll go to Phil first. How would you describe the state of cybersecurity in the NHS as it is now?
Much improved. Your work on WannaCry has been incredibly useful to us, and WannaCry was a point of waking up, I think, for the healthcare sector. Subsequent to WannaCry, significant investment and improvement in the NHS trusts, in the NHS organisations themselves. Much of that led locally, because I think they felt the dread and the impact of what happened in WannaCry, and none of them wanted to feel that again. So significant improvement in trusts in the delivery, the cybersecurity of the delivery of healthcare. However, it is worth saying that there are a lot, it's a big system. So my scope is probably 140,000 organisations across the health and care sector. They range from large enterprise scale trusts running multiple hospitals, multiple different services, down to small care homes with 2 or 3 beds that make no profit. So the cybersecurity of the sector as a whole is more variable. And what I would also say is, the greatest threat the healthcare system, especially the NHS, faces at the moment really is criminal ransomware. It's disruption of services and therefore leading to patient harm. We have a reputation as an NHS of not paying ransoms, so we're not usually targeted for that. Our supply chain, however, is different, and I would say our biggest risk, cyber risk at the moment, is probably coming from our supply chain, which I think reflects 5 or 6 years of investment in the NHS organisations themselves. We now probably have another 5 or 6 years ahead of us to improve the supply chain to some degree.
Brilliant. And Sean, from a you work more commercially as well, what would you say as a kind of supplier to the NHS? What would you see as somebody who's worked both internally and externally, following on from that?
Yeah, so in terms of the state of cyber, specifically, I'd say, there's a lot of good that has happened, I would say, systematically over the last 5 or 6 years. Definitely move forward, but as we've moved forward, as you can imagine, the adversaries have moved even further forward. So if I gave you my assessment, maybe in 2 words of where we are, I would say it's probably, let's say, predominantly predictable. where we are at the moment. Not being negative on this, it's kind of the state of play, and there's still areas, you know, where we lack focus, and that would be around resilience, for example. And I know this is part of the national strategy. I know a lot of this stuff is articulated in blueprints, in documents, but there's still a lot to do on the ground. So that would be that there's still elements where we've got, I want to say, maybe in some cases limited leadership on the ground. We've got other pressures around, various, services where you might have some teams, for example, that might not have the resources. So we've definitely got a skills gap, I think. And when I say skills gap, not just in terms of engineering, in terms of the myriad of skills required in cyber. So yeah, I'd say definitely predominantly predictable. That's what is predictable. I suppose what is unpredictable, if I could just elaborate on that, is the fact that, we don't know, we can't predict, who these people are, where they're coming from, and what they're intending to do. And probably I'm referring to threat actors now, and probably the biggest thing, when they choose to target. Because again, it's not like it's, on a clock and you can prepare for it. They give you an hour to say, cool, clean up and, and get yourself ready. It just happens. And when it comes, when those events occur, it's literally an eye opener.
Absolutely. Richard.
What was the question again? Sorry.
How would you describe the state of cybersecurity in the NHS?
Okay. Answering that specific question, I think it's the NHS is probably better commented on by Phil than me, but I think in general in healthcare, in general in the UK, cybersecurity has had to really raise its game in terms of how it responds to emerging threats. And there's been a significant change, especially in the last 5 years, and you can see it manifested in the team that we've got in UKHSA. You can see it in other organisations. The pace of change and also the extent to which we have to now work is much more significant than perhaps 10 or 15 years ago. So I think there's been considerable improvements, and it's also an industry that's very dependent on commercial vendors, I think, and the relationship we have with commercial vendors really enables us to access technologies that we obviously can't build in-house. AI, we might come on to talk about AI and LLMs later, but the industry itself is working incredibly hard to develop the next range of technologies, and particularly in security operations, we're obviously very dependent on that kind of thing.
And Nikki, I'm going to slightly change that question and ask you for a more kind of global perspective and what we're kind of looking at in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo probably a lot of what is happening in the UK. I think we're progressing optimistically, but I suppose it's a sort of whack-a-mole, if I can use the game where you hit moles that appear once you've got them all down. Something brand new pops up, and once again you're chasing them. So I think when I did research in 2020 on the state of cybersecurity across healthcare organizations in low and middle income countries, and we used the Oxford University Maturity Models for Nations framework to do a maturity assessment. When we did that, the sort of most mature area was on legislation and regulation, and the least mature area was around awareness and education and training. And I think probably I would say all these years later, it's still very much the case. So we saw, for example, this summer, the African Union have ratified their cybersecurity and personal data protection legislation, and that's something that all African Union members will be adhering to from now on. And we're seeing in various low and middle income countries specific cyber laws that have come into force in the last couple of years. But at the same time, we have this whole other side of things, which is the people boots on the ground trying to understand how they and their hospital and how their staff can deal with cyber attacks that are increasing and coming daily. And I think personally, there's still a lot to do around education, awareness and training, both at the sort of healthcare leadership level, but also those staff and all staff really within healthcare organizations who come at the topic with very little knowledge and very little sort of awareness of where the real risks are and the potential downstream threats.
Excellent. And now just touching upon threats, so Phil briefly mentioned about third-party vendors. What would you say are the kind of biggest threats that the healthcare system is facing at the moment, both in terms of infrastructure, technology, external threats? What are our kind of, say, top three? And I'll start off with Richard there.
In terms of threats, I think probably the biggest, most significant threat, which tops many of the scales, and certainly all the information I'm receiving suggests ransomware is probably one of the biggest threats to healthcare. But also there are areas which are increasing in threat as well. Business email compromise attacks are on the rise, which is a compromise of a supply chain by an attacker to then impersonate them and to try and get a target organization to take actions. That's surprisingly effective as an attack method because that person receiving the victim of the attack has really got no other information to go on except the identity of the person that's just been assumed by the attacker. And there can be losses up to 300,000 or 400,000 in one instance, particularly when it's targeting finance departments. So that's quite a serious threat, and it's rising up the leaderboard. But healthcare in quantitative terms, overall compared to other sectors, receives less attacks compared to the industrial sector, for instance. But nevertheless, the impact of those attacks can be significant when they do happen, and that's obviously what everyone working in cybersecurity is trying to avoid.
So some of the things you're describing there are sort of issues, risks and threats. I mean, absolutely from an external threat perspective, it's criminal ransomware. There's money to be made, there's plenty of organisations looking to make money. Some of them are good at what they do, some of them less good. That means the less good ones aren't great at targeting. That can cause problems because we don't get targeted, we get caught up in some commodity campaign that doesn't target us. I think there's a growing concern around our critical health infrastructure, especially given the nature of the conflict we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine and potential future tensions with China over Taiwan. So there is a real concern that our critical health infrastructure might be subject to targeting, but that's not a current issue, that's not a thing we need to plan for. But in general, there's also a bunch of issues in the healthcare system. So the system is under increasing pressure. We've got huge backlogs of work we're doing. There isn't enough people in the system to do anything, any of the particular tasks, let alone our cyber specialists. We've got increasing demands on the money. Inflation has driven costs up. So time for people to do things, money to invest to do it. Just as an organisation that cannot take disruption because there's just too much to get done, we can't leave things to run. We've got a historical investment in technology, which we tend to sweat. It's one of the behaviours of the health systems. We like to sweat our assets, which means we have a lot of old technology. We have a hockey stick of digitalisation just kicking off. So we are seeing a huge number of new innovations. We're seeing, rapid adoption of electronic public patient health records. Up to, we hope 100% by the end of the year across all trusts. That brings with it new challenges, and it challenges a lot of old assumptions around resilience. So, healthcare is a classic complex adaptive system. There's a lot of different pressures, there's a lot of different actors all operating independently. We are trying to coordinate and sort of corral everybody into a similar direction, but we've also got these external pressures which at some point is going to flip us into a new state. And also we are reorganising the healthcare system through the integrated care system. So we don't, there's a lot of risks and threats out there. I think, as I said, we're not so much targeted by the criminals because we have a reputation for not paying. We are increasingly dependent on our suppliers who are targeted. We are under huge pressures. We don't have the capacity necessarily that we would like. And that capacity, especially as we go into winter now, is going to come under pressure. So our ability to respond, to adapt to changes is limited. I think that's what we're at, really. We're here to improve the game and to make things better. But I'm not here to make some platonic ideal of cybersecurity. What I'm here is to protect patient outcomes. And sometimes protecting patient outcomes, and I made this case, I was involved in UKHSA for a while, I ran the security NHS test and trace. There were times when you look at a system and you say, if it takes us a week more to fix this, but that's 15,000 more people catch COVID. Which risk do we take?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, in those circumstances, we're going to stop 15,000 people catching COVID, and we're going to deal with the cyber risk otherwise. And that's at the core of what we do here. We're here to defend patient outcomes. We're here to improve cybersecurity, but given the pressures and the challenges in the system.
That's brilliant. And Sean?
Well, I can't match what
Yeah.
Richard, Nikki, and Phil
It's a
said.
very comprehensive
Maybe
account.
what I'll do is maybe just dovetail with,
Yeah.
Phil's synopsis there, and that is around the systemic nature of the threats that we face. Geopolitics. One sneeze in one country has a profound impact on another country. That is evident. You can see it in the news if you just go and look at the headlines right now. And these people are getting sophisticated. Economically, there's countries now that are going to struggle. Low-income countries, for example, where people will resort to this kind of crime, out of sight, out of mind crime. This further, I guess, proliferates around some of the governments out there. We could call them rogue governments, but where we at this point, and there was a gentleman from, I think, a company called Cyber Reason that said this well. He always spoke about, and he coined this phrase and said, state-sponsored versus state-ignored. So as you can imagine, if you've got rules and, your allies and, ultimately you have rules of engagement, if there's threat actors and they're doing X, Y, Z, guess what? We'll find them and we'll apprehend them and whatever the case is. Whereas now you've got state ignored where, some of those specific countries, if they're of value in terms of their skill set, you just ignore it. And as you can imagine, if that had to proliferate throughout the world, we're kind of in trouble. So yeah, that's the one element, I guess, just dovetailing with Phil. The second thing I think is sometimes we don't help ourselves. When we learn of emerging stuff or emerging threats, we don't really prepare for it. So research and development doesn't always go into this. I know we're probably going to touch on AI, but if I just spoke about quantum, for example, I can go into the details of why I feel that is the way that it is. But in essence, on the ground, how do you get a workforce to prepare for this? What does it mean for them? And my view is there's always got to be a pool of people somewhere doing the legwork to kind of unpack what this looks like. You know what I mean? Even in cyber, we talk about segmentation, we talk about all this like zero trust, and people could sit here and say, yeah, it is a buzzword. I actually think it's a respectable level of principles that if we adapt it and apply these principles, we'll be in a better position with better outcomes. But fundamentally, something like that could take years and years before somebody actually truly embraces it. So yeah, so for me, that is a threat, us not adapting quick enough to the world outside us. And then the challenge from my perspective, and probably Phil's perspective, is how do you get the board to fully realize that and to, realign, the group and the organizations as a wider entity about, look, that's the direction in which we need to pivot.
And Nikki, from a global perspective, what kind of threats are we looking at, or should we be considering?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably threats across the whole ecosystem of healthcare in low and middle income countries, in part probably stemming again from geopolitical systems and the nature of healthcare in low and middle income countries, which is in part funded by international donors who come with their own systems, processes, networks. And there's the expectation that healthcare providers in country move ahead with those technologies and those systems, but it's not always backed up, I suppose, with the knowledge and the skills and the experience in country to be able to manage them effectively. So I think I would probably, to answer the question more fully, come back to the ECHO framework and talk about some of the dimensions. So we start in the ECHO framework. If we can show a picture, that would also be nice. But the second dimension of the framework is governance. And I think in low and middle income countries, there really needs to be a push towards governance at all levels. And then from there, it's a whole presentation. Wait for it.
One more. So there we go.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so governance, as I mentioned, then number 3 was organizational strategy. And again, it takes a lot of experience, a lot of continuous work in order to create those organizational strategies and lead them from a very much committed leadership level that translates into the whole organization. And then the fourth part of the ECHO framework is risk management. Again, it's critical in the low middle income context to be aware of what is often a very, very complicated risk profile, as it is also in the UK, but just slightly differently. So that needs to be managed and assessed and updated extremely regularly. And you need, again, the manpower and you need the financial backing to be able to do that, which is a large challenge. Then we get into the awareness, education and training component. And again, as I've mentioned, that is hugely lacking in the UK and in low and middle income countries. So more work really needs to be done at all levels, starting probably with leadership, to if they can begin to understand cybersecurity, its importance, what needs to happen to improve and address challenges towards resilience, then that can be filtered down through staff across the health sector. Taking me finally to the sixth component, which is technical capabilities. And so this is the technical stuff that these guys deal with in their day-to-day work. And again, in low and middle income countries, there is a huge staff shortage in general, but especially in ICT and cybersecurity. So one of the key priorities really needs to be scaling up a workforce and training a workforce that can deal with these emerging challenges in cybersecurity.
Excellent. Thank you. Well done for remembering each of the 6 domains. I'm not sure I could recall. And Phil, you mentioned about reorganisation of the NHS, which we seem to do in a cyclical fashion. In terms of our move towards integrated care systems, how is that going to impact cybersecurity and organisation?
Sure. So integrated care systems present some new challenges, but also some great opportunities. I think in terms of challenges, and I'm a cyber guy, so I have to always think of the downside first. The challenges that we will see increasing cooperation, sharing of capability and systems across localities. So we will find that key systems will be procured jointly, they'll be operated jointly. What that will do is have then a consequent impact on digital resilience, in that more organisations will be affected should there be a system outage or some sort of disruption. So there is a potential challenge coming where we need to realign our current resilience assumptions. For example, if a hospital catches fire, we have in the NHS, the resilience team are brilliant at getting all the patients in that hospital and all the patients going to that hospital to the ones down the road. Brilliant. They can do it in a heartbeat, nobody gets hurt. It's a well-practiced and positioned activity. If the whole locality, the whole integrated care system is using the same technology systems and they are disrupted by some sort of cyber event, well, the next hospital that has available systems is going to be 70 miles down the road. It's not going to be 5 minutes drive. So suddenly our assumptions around what we can do with our physical resilience change because of our digital collaboration. So that's one of the real challenges that ICS will present. The opportunity, though, is we don't have enough skilled capacity in the system to manage cybersecurity. We're never going to pay as much as big tech. We're never going to pay as much as finance. Cyber jobs tend to be concentrated in the big cities. We are everywhere. And the UK generates, I think, somewhere in the region of 17,000 new jobs in cybersecurity every year, and we generate new apprentices and graduates at a rate of about 10,000 every year. So every year we're about 7,000 more jobs behind in terms of capacity in the market. So the idea that we will ever have enough cyber people to manage the health system in totality is dangerous fiction. The ICSs present us with a real opportunity to brigade the capability we have and share it across those localities, so that all the trusts, all of the care providers, all of the local government authorities, everybody who's integrated into that integrated care system can share capabilities, share expertise, and build on things together from a cyber point of view. Huge opportunity. And that's really where we're pushing in the national strategy, the health and care strategy through to 2030. There is a real focus on how do we build that capability at an integrated care system level and use it as our point of leverage in the system.
Brilliant. Sean, you're working with ICSs. What's been your experience in terms of changing needs, capabilities, etc.?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the needs are going to be similar. I think when you go, obviously the requirements might be different, but the needs are still going to be, they're still going to want, I want to say, improve resilience. There's going to be stuff around cyber, detection and response, so tooling, all that kind of stuff. I think is going to be similar. It's just a case of how do you adopt, a joint workforce or a joint capability, I guess, around cyber. And the thing that I say is, because as much as it's focused on cyber, the important thing is cyber's only a component of the whole. It's a subcomponent, and you need the sum of all components in order to really reap the rewards. So my view, IT is going to have to play a big part in that. There's going to have to be consolidation. I know there's a national mandate around rationalization, but I want to say can't say been preparing for this, but conceptually been thinking about this for 2 years already. And the reason for it is, what would it look like? What would good look like from an ICS perspective? And, we've got some frameworks to work against, but I don't think if there's a genuine use case out there at the moment. So in essence, I think it is still very much a blank canvas. So fingers crossed, I'm hoping to get my first, let's say project around leading an ICS, a London-based ICS. If that goes well, it's like, what can you do? What's the art of the possible in terms of trying to do more with less, which is going to be difficult, but as Phil rightfully said, there's definitely opportunity. And I'll give an example. I always put this under an analogy that I used around the Mariana Trench. And, for anybody listening to this that's heard some of my previous talks, that seems to come up. It's a recurring theme, but it's almost like the NHS is moving to new grounds, new feeding grounds, if you wish, which is this ICS. And the water's different, the temperature's different, the depth is different. So the opportunity is, the deeper you go, the more value you will get. But the problem is, you can't go too deep, because if you go to the depths of the Mariana Trench at 10 kilometers, as you can imagine, low oxygen, all of that kind of stuff. So you need to find the sweet spot. And that could be collective strategy, that could be standardization, there's a myriad of lighthouse projects that could be born from, this new area of opportunity, in my opinion.
Brilliant, thank you. And we're going to move on to everyone's favourite topic on AI and LLMs. And actually, we're beginning to see more and more AI tools that are coming onto the market. They're actually being utilised in clinical practice, and now kind of hype around large language models and how they can be used in healthcare as well.
If information is submitted into an LLM, is it recycled and used to update that model to then help somebody else out? That's a bit of a challenge. The jurisdiction of data processing, a lot of the emerging LLM technologies, certainly that I'm aware of, may have jurisdiction challenges around where the data is processed. So it could be that the United States is the place where that data is processed. Anything submitted obviously is going over there. That's the kind of thing which governance, risk and compliance teams think about all of the time when they're trying to manage the supply chain, because obviously they're responsible for the data. It's got to be processed in a location that's approved. So that's another kind of dimension to it all. There are kind of more philosophical challenges around LLMs, which is, if you've got a model that's information submitted to you, then get a response to help you make decisions, are you kind of in a way limited by whatever information that model has? Does that stifle creativity or innovation? Is it potentially contextless, in the sense that that somebody can see lots of information coming out of an LLM and think, great, this is brilliant, this will really help me work out what I need to do next. But is that situated in the right context? So the kind of broad brush approach that I think many government departments are thinking about is the differentiation between public large language models and then organizationally owned and hosted schemes. And certainly there's a strong steer in that direction because of those kinds of concerns. So it's exciting. I mean, there's lots of potential. LLMs in the cybersecurity space can do a lot in terms of enhancing our ability to grapple with the amount of data that we process. In UKHSA, we process around about 600 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a statistic, my boss really loves, but that's the amount of data that we process in terms of sensory data across the estate to try and detect cybersecurity problems. And there's additional data on top of that as well. That is a lot of data to process, and cybersecurity, particularly in incident response, you've got to get across all of that data as quickly as you can to work out what the problem is. And that's where AI is particularly beneficial. So I think once all the issues are solved, it's going to be quite exciting when it starts to take off.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to sort of think in my context. It's obviously at the real infancy in terms of use. But where we have seen LLMs used, we've noted a concern around the use of third-party technologies. So obviously, if data, and particularly sensitive data from a healthcare organization, is used and plugged into a technology, we come across some issues around IP, as well as issues of data protection and cybersecurity, because that data then moves further and further away from our remit as an organization. And the question is, how do we protect that, and how do we ensure that, for example, information on patients or information that would be sensitive to the organization doesn't fall into hands where we'd be in breach of regulations. So I think until such issues are ironed out, for the most part, I'm personally not necessarily recommending the use of third-party LLMs as part of my work. We are looking potentially to develop some of our own that would address those issues, and the issues you mentioned around data leaving and being used outside of jurisdiction. So I think it's probably the data protection, cybersecurity concern that is the most pressing, but there's an additional sort of concern that we have around authenticity and trust associated with these technologies. So we certainly go into it hoping that everything that is said by the technology and is presented by the technology is accurate and trustworthy. But the threat to healthcare organizations, if it's not, is quite substantial in terms of being able to be a trusted and supported source of healthcare for patients. We need to make sure that we're on top of misinformation, disinformation, and false spread of information that may have been produced by that technology. In saying that, though, I do support, and we're looking into a variety of LLMs and other AI technologies.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask Phil and Sean for more AI-based tools that people are using in practice now, for example, clinical decision support tools that I would use in my clinical practice. What threats should we be aware of, or what are the kind of challenges of kind of bringing those tools into practice? What should we be aware of, and what potential threats are there in using them?
Sure. So I think we need to put the context around this, that AI has been a part of healthcare now for some time. We have a relatively mature framework for how to manage that risk and how to develop clinically related AI tooling. I think one of our sort of moments that we are facing at the moment is that the capability of AI tools in a clinical setting and the appropriate use of those tools is relatively well put together. However, the rapid growth and change in the capability of AI as a general concept means that probably in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll be lucky to buy a new product that doesn't have it baked in. So while we will have AI pretty well covered when it comes to clinical support, clinical decision making, the AI that sits in our finance systems, the AI that sits in our HR systems, our email systems, the AI that sits in our scheduling systems, the AI that does communications engagement on our websites that allows people to book appointments, all of this is going to hit us as a wave. And so we're doing a piece of policy work at the moment, and I wouldn't want to dive into too much detail because we're sort of prejudging the outcome of it, but we're doing a piece of policy work at the moment really looking at the risks, the cyber risks to and from healthcare in AI. And that's twofold, which is both the cyber risk from the deployment of AI at scale across all these different environments, but also the cyber risks of AI being deployed against us. Because, you know, at the moment, to spearfish somebody to do the open source intelligence gathering, the footprinting of a senior exec, the writing of specific emails using trusted environments that they already know to approach them, that's quite intensive activity. If I can now automate that with a prompt and an AI across everybody in the organisation, then I'm not placing phishing anymore, I'm placing spear phishing at scale. That's that's a new threat environment for us. So these are the sorts of things we're starting to look at. In terms of the challenges, one of the big challenges we see with AI, and again, I think this is something that's well governed within our adoption of AI in clinical decision making, but probably isn't necessarily present in every every startup that's developing an AI clinical platform. So it's one of those things where we have to sort of educate the market. Is the sense of health inequity. So, you know, if an image recognition tool has been trained on people of a particular skin colour, if data has been taken from people of a particular social background, are we going to be giving decisions and advice relevant to somebody who is not represented in that data? I think that's one of the core challenges we have. There is the fact that it will make mistakes at higher error rates. Someone's going to be liable for that. You know, the US will twist itself in all sorts of legal possibilities to who takes that liability, but that's a challenge we will have to address. There is, as you mentioned, the ability to reverse data out of AI. So if I ask a specific set of questions in a specific way, I can gather a fair amount of data about the model it's based on. What does that mean for the use of patient data in the development of models, and how do we protect that? These are all the challenges we're going to face. That said, the NHS faces a huge productivity challenge. So over the next 20, 30 years, demographic changes are going to drive demand from patients with chronic conditions through the roof. Our current productivity would require everybody in England to be working for the NHS to deliver demand we expect to get in 2050. So automation, whether that be through AI, whether that be through more efficient use of data for planning and other purposes, or whether that be for the use of digital tooling to reduce friction in the system, these are part of one of the big bets on how we manage that productivity shift. So one of the risks with AI is that it doesn't, and actually we really need it to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, how do I match that? I mean, I think Phil's just, I'm just going to give you a echo of what Phil said. And again, you mentioned two-sided, it's like a two-sided coin to me. The one is what happens internal and one is what happens external. I've touched the external one first. And again, you know, if I just use ChatGPT as an example, and it's an interesting one because when it started, there was stuff around, tell me how do I write code for X, for example, to infiltrate this particular system, and it gives you the blueprint. And then as time has gone on, people will say, oh, this is a threat. And then guess what? Those large language models or AI or OpenAI, then, you know, the ethical people that manage this will go and rewrite it, that if somebody asks the question, it'll respond and say, sorry, can't answer that because it's ethically wrong. And then the next stage is you're getting cheat sheets now to how to circumvent the question. If I were a researcher and I did this, and oh, okay, no worries, this is what you do. So as you can see, and I actually experimented with it last night, coincidentally, because I know it's getting more advanced in terms of preventing itself from actually answering your question. And would you believe it, I found another way to circumvent a already circumvented question. So anyway, that's the one element. And like I said, you know, you don't need, you know, specific people that are skilled anymore. And take note, when that's only one, you know, AI tool or large language model that I'm referring to. What you're starting to see now is a lot of them starting to emerge with their own data sets. So as you can imagine, how do you regulate and control all of this stuff? So anyway, so that's the external. The internal, again, as Phil's pretty much pointed out as well, I think to elaborate on what Phil said, I think there's one important thing internally. And I only picked up on this on previous projects that I've worked on, two of them being implementation of stroke AI, and then there was a second one around radiology. So if memory serves me right, a radiology department that I worked with, if the numbers are right, so I speak under correction, I think general x-rays, for example, it was doing reporting on, I think around after 6 months, somewhere around 51% of general x-rays accounted for. Anyway, what I picked up as an engineer, cyber guy, whatever it was a lot of these startups were very quick to get the AI out the door. And, you know, we always focus on confidentiality and, of course, availability, but the integrity part of this is how can these things be manipulated? You know, how do we know that the output is not being tampered with? And again, this might sound like far-fetched, you know, scenario, but the reality is a lot of those startups, from what I've picked up, would use open source, you know, and do the best they can to get this out, get a sale, get a use case, and try and get seed funding and move this forward. they don't come pre-packaged with security at the front door. So that is another area that I think will require, you know, general, local and possible national oversight.
Brilliant, thank you. Some chaos out there. So I'm going to open up questions to the audience. So any takers? Gentleman here.
Thank you so much. Lorenzo Cavallaro from UCL, and I work at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. And I have tons of questions I would love to ask, but please, you know, take the mic out, because I'm also an academic, so I tend to speak a lot. So I'm going to pick on one of them, which is very interesting to me. So I wanted to understand a little bit more your take on the cybersecurity skill gap that I believe all of you mentioned. And somebody, I believe it was Phil, you mentioned that the UK produces 17,000 jobs, and the university churn out 10,000 graduates. So there is a 7,000 gap. So I'm trying to understand also, is it just a matter of numbers, or is it a matter also of quality? Because universities are just one element in the picture. Now we have MOOCs, we have training, so we have all sort of different jobs, and the expertise is not necessarily the most traditional cybersecurity expertise that you might draw from computer science or computer engineering, but it's more like, you know, touching on all sort of different aspects of skill sets as well. So do you guys believe that we should also try to revisit or reconsider the way that we recruit talent? Because now my perspective is that it's not very much streamlined to recruit specific expertise. It requires a lot of effort that companies don't necessarily have in-house. How can we outsource this in a way that is sound, fair, and so forth and so on?
So this is a challenge I'm looking at right now for the healthcare sector. It's quite clear to me that we have a capacity problem, so we don't have enough people in the right places to advise on cybersecurity, which means that decisions tend to be made without the right advice in the room, which means we have then things to clean up later. We can't at the moment rely on apprenticeship schemes and university graduates as inbound. I think we will all fish in that pool, but there's a lot of competition fishing in that pool. Every sector is going to be placing into that. What I am clear on is if I open up a bunch of new roles in cybersecurity, it's not like there's a lot of cybersecurity people sitting spare in the market. I'm also somewhat limited in the NHS because we have the Agenda for Change pay scales, which means I'm not going to be competitive. So first of all, there's not a lot of people. They're not necessarily in the places I need them to be, and I can't necessarily pay what everyone else is going to pay for the same people. The other challenge I put back to a lot of people is people talk about the skills challenge, we don't have enough people out there. While a lot of cybersecurity teams in the commercial sector and the public sector have been given investment and to grow, very few of them have any fat on the bone to train new people. And I think that putting the responsibility for the training of new people in the discipline entirely on universities, for example, is wrong. I think we should be doing this ourselves as well as a discipline. So one of the things I'm very keen to do within the healthcare sector is, yes, to increase our capacity, but to do that by growing our own talent. We will always lose talent, so there will always be churn, and that's because there is more money to be made and there are more exciting jobs to have elsewhere. Although I will say, you look at AI in healthcare, you look at some of the digital technology in healthcare, if you want to play with cool things, it's a great place to go and play with stuff. But we need to look outside of the traditional recruitment routes. So, for example, ex-prisoners. There is a number of very good schemes that will take some of the ex-prisoners who otherwise come from areas where they have no hope of getting a job, where we can train them into cyber, we can give them a job, and actually they can work and have a career that they would have no hope of elsewhere. The neurodiverse community is underrepresented in the world of work. If we can make the accommodations that the community needs, and I should say I myself am autistic and have ADHD, so I'm quite keen on this one. If we can make the accommodations the community needs, there is a whole untapped pool of talent there which is underrepresented. Weirdly, ex-elite athletes. So there's a wide number of elite athletes who get to their early 30s, realise they don't have a long career ahead of them, and start looking for other things. They have brilliant skills, great drive, but no particular work-related skills. So we can train them, we can bring them in. When we look at social inequality, we are everywhere. So many of the communities we serve don't have people who go to university. They don't have cyber people sitting around. If we can take some people from those communities, train them, and put them back into their communities working in healthcare, they can stay where their families are, they can have a good career. So for us, I think the future is about the variety of pipelines of inbound talent that we can identify and engage with directly, versus just creating a whole bunch of roles and saying, you know, oh God, we can only fill 28% of them, so we'll just have to sit with a load of empty roles. And I think that's on us to do. But the other thing, the quality question you raise, it's not just good enough to get a graduate or somebody who's been through a boot camp. It takes 3 to 5 years for someone to be really useful in cyber, whichever end that be. That's not to discount people who've got less than 3 to 5 years experience, but you wouldn't want to put somebody in a management role in an integrated care system. You wouldn't want to put somebody running an incident who hasn't had some level of experience, some level of on-the-job training. So we have to accept that the people we bring in from these other environments, we are going to have to not only give them the training and skills they need, but we're going to have a plan for how we move them around the system, put them in different roles so that they get the experience so that they become useful to us over the longer term. And we'll accept we'll lose some, we'll keep some, and we just have to keep that engine running. So that's really how we're looking at that. I think it's unfair of us to purely rely on graduates and apprentices to solve our problem.
Hi there, Toby Stone, ISST. Rewinding right back to the beginning, if you forgive me, because it's all been really interesting. When you were talking about the progress the NHS had made, both of you, can you give any sense as to what extent that was about human behaviour and what extent it was about tech and infrastructure?
So, very much both. So there has been significant money invested since WannaCry, which has increased the technical capability of the system. One of the decisions we made early on, and it predates my time, but I'm happy to take credit for it. But one of the decisions we made early on was we couldn't put, for example, a security operations centre in every organisation. There wasn't enough money for it, there wasn't enough people for it. What we could do is produce a national cybersecurity operations centre that provided services to every organisation. That allowed us to scale the capability very quickly across a very broad and varied environment. And I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. So that was both a strategic decision around what the right way to do it was, as well as we needed more people to run that, as well as we needed the technology and the service to underpin the services and to deliver it. So I don't think you can pick the two apart. I think what WannaCry did do was it raised the awareness amongst CIOs and amongst boards generally about the importance of cyber, and to an extent our clinical colleagues. So we probably wouldn't have gone as far and as fast without the people, but we needed the technology to improve and underpin it as well. So I don't see cyber as a technology issue. I see it as an issue in its own right that requires people, process, and technology to deliver. And if you're lacking in any one of those, it will fail.
Richard, did you add anything?
Yes, I think the question was around the progress that's been made in terms of in terms of the industry and similar. So I think the human behaviour is an interesting aspect to that, because I think certainly from what I've seen in the last 5 years, there's a much more kind of integrated approach to how cybersecurity is integrated approach to how cybersecurity is implemented in organisations, and you can see that in UK HSA and others. And it's a much more integrated, outward-looking, people-oriented type of approach, where actually good cybersecurity sometimes is just about navigating the governance structures in an organisation, and that sometimes can deliver really significant benefits. And certainly, obviously, the last few years, there's been a lot of focus in how do we. You can spend a lot of time trying to fix a problem in cybersecurity, but sometimes you can think smarter and just do quite a small change, but it has a significant payoff in terms of security overall. And that can be achieved through many different ways. But technology has moved on significantly. And also organizations are sometimes, they're complex systems, and I think it's a point that Phil alluded to earlier, that they're complex systems where they can be constrained by decisions they have made in the past, particularly around risk. If you look at, say, security operations, for instance, most teams will be operating an incident management system, quite a complex system, as I was talking about earlier, that ingests lots of data. Decisions on that 5 or 8 years ago can really hinder the agility of the organization moving forward. So there could be significant technical debt in that infrastructure. So, out of support systems and similar, which then really limit what the team can then do in the future. So some of the most exciting things, and I think UKHA is in this space where you can almost take a greenfield approach to many different things, bring in the latest technology and unlocks a lot of advantages. But it's quite a complex problem. Some organizations will be, and it's to do with funding decisions, for instance, around cybersecurity. There'll be a decision to invest perhaps 1 year and not the next. And then that has a ripple effect all the way through into the future in terms of the decisions that can be made then about cybersecurity in general.
Thank you. So we're over time, and that's been a very quick hour, but I want to thank our brilliant panelists for a very rapid review of cybersecurity in healthcare. It's been very informative and some brilliant answers to all the different questions. So audience applause, thank you very much.